All Blacks have released their Chasing the Sun, and it paints a little bit of a different picture of what happened in the World Cup final against the Springboks. Their series has been released on YouTube, and episode 1 covers the Rugby World Cup final against the Springboks. In this video, I'm going to break down the episode and give you my thoughts as a South African fan on how the All Blacks see that Rugby World Cup final. As always, make sure you leave your opinions down in the comments, your thoughts down in the comments. Make sure you leave this video a like, and as always, make sure you absolutely mur that subscribe button if you haven't. So the entire 15-minute episode that they've released is all about the final against the Springboks, which did seem a little bit strange to me. Normally they leave the final for the end like the Springboks did in Chasing the Sun. Obviously the Springboks ended up winning the Rugby World Cup final, so it's almost like a triumph right at the end. I think for the All Blacks, they kind of wanted to deal with it and get it out of the way and then talk a little bit more about the Rugby World Cup in the following episodes. But my initial thoughts on this series is that it's very well shot. It's very interesting to see the All Black side of things and sort of the things they say about the Rugby World Cup final against the Springboks, because we've had the Springboks points of view and now we get the All Blacks points of view. It's also very, very cool that they've released it on YouTube for completely free, and I think more rugby teams need to start doing this, making documentary type of style videos on YouTube. The first point they bring up is Sam Cane's red card. Now, I can vividly remember watching the Rugby World Cup final in a bar, and when Sam Cane got that red card, the entire bar exploded with excitement. This is exactly what we wanted as Springbok fans. We're 14 versus 15. Surely we're going to win the Rugby World Cup. But it kind of changes my perspective when you see it from Sam Cane's perspective. It's absolutely devastating. I mean, this is a moment he's worked for his entire life. He feels like he's let the entire team down, feels like he's let his family down, the players' family, and it's just devastating to see that shock that's still on his face, that emotion that he carries around with him after receiving that red card in a World Cup final. So that was the first sort of point that started changing my perspective on that Rugby World Cup final. They then dive into the actual game and the final, and it starts by sort of them building up how big this game of rugby was. It was tagged and named as the biggest game of rugby union ever. You had the All Blacks with 3 World Cups. You had the Springboks with 3 World Cups. And now this is the race to 4 World Cups. It's one of the biggest rivalries in rugby history, Springboks versus the All Blacks. It's in a final. It's absolutely massive. And adding to that, for the All Blacks, there were quite a few players leaving. That was their last test match for the All Blacks. Aaron Smith was one. Sam Whitelock was one. But also this new crop of players coming up that wanted to make a name for themselves, the Geordie Barretts, Will Jordan. Ian Foster described it perfectly in this episode. He said, it's a clash of styles. There's going to be no excuses, and that it's a dream final. And if I reflect back on that final, obviously it's been a couple of months now, over half a year, but it did feel like the biggest game of rugby I've ever watched, with the biggest rivalry, going for the biggest trophy to make history for the first time. I think we forget how big that final was and how much it meant to both the All Blacks and to the Springboks. Then all the players run out and it's haka time, and they spend a little bit of time on the haka and Aaron Smith's story. Aaron Smith led that haka for the final because it was his last game for the All Blacks. It was a very, very emotional part of the episode because they dive a little bit into Aaron Smith and a little bit about his background, and that he was doing this for his dad. In April of 2023, last year, a couple of months before the Rugby World Cup, unfortunately, Aaron Smith's father passed away. But before he passed away and got really, really ill, he said to Aaron Smith, go to France and make me proud. And Aaron Smith kind of speaks about that was his why. That's why he wanted to win the Rugby World Cup. That's why he was there. He wanted to do it for his dad, and you can see when he's singing the national anthem and when he's giving the haka how emotional he is, and he just has this driving force behind him that made him very, very good in that final, and he had something to play for. And I think as Springbok fans, we sometimes forget that these All Blacks, our rivals, are also people. They're also humans with their own lives, and we sort of put them on this pedestal as sort of, we look at them as sort of villains and rivals. But Aaron Smith is a human just like me and you, and it's very, very cool that they show this side of him, this emotional side of him, and his why to wanting to win the Rugby World Cup. And then they go into the game and it kicks off, and obviously things didn't start too well for the All Blacks. They comment on how physical the Springboks are at the biggest stage, how physical rugby is, but the game didn't start off that well for the All Blacks. Obviously they picked up a yellow card in the second minute. That's why Bongi and Bonambe ended up going off in the second minute, because I think it was Frizzell landed on his leg and ended up getting a yellow card. That then allowed for Deon Fourie to come on and sort of craft one of the best rugby stories in the history of rugby, coming on in a position that he doesn't play in the second minute, and then he sort of plays the game of his life. That first half, the Springboks were completely dominant. They went into halftime 12-6 up, but Sam Cane also got his red card, and they go a little bit more into that on how it happened and how devastated Sam Cane was that he ended up picking up that red card. But it kind of fueled the team. They go into halftime. The Springboks are leaving 12-6. Pollard's having a very, very good game. He's kicked all of his penalties. And then in the changing room, they speak about the mood a little bit in the changing room, and that it's a little bit downtrodden. No, it's silent. Nothing's really going on. And if you cast your mind back to Chasing the Sun, when Pieter-Steph du Toit stood up in the Springbok changing room, I think it was against France or England in the quarters or semis, when it was eerily quiet. And then Pieter-Steph stood up, not being someone who really speaks that much, but stood up and gave a speech and said a couple of words that really got the boys together to go out in that second half and ended up winning either the quarterfinal or the semi-final. Well, that's exactly what happened for the All Blacks in the final at halftime. One of their coaches, I'm not exactly sure who he is, not Ian Foster, but it's one of their coaches. And he goes on to say that he sometimes thinks a lot of things during halftime. He's more on the analysis type of vibe. But in that moment, in the Rugby World Cup final, the All Blacks are down to 14 men. The changing room is eerily quiet. He thought that this was his time to say something, and he had a Pieter-Steph du Toit moment. This is what he said. He said, "No one expects us to get the job done here, but wow, it would be one hell of a story if we won. It'll be part of All Black folklore. Go write the story." And then they cut to some of the All Black players kind of reacting to those words that have been said, and that's exactly what they needed. That speech, those couple of lines got the All Blacks revving to go, and they go into the All Black mentality that they never give up. Even though they're one man down to the Springboks in a World Cup final, they trail by 6 points. That is the exact position they want to be in as athletes, and I think that is the mindset that the All Blacks have, which is phenomenal to see. It's giving me goosebumps now just speaking about it. But that speech kind of changed the trajectory of the game, because the All Blacks came out in that second half one man down and gave the Boks a real good run for their money. I think as Springbok fans, we forget how close that final was, and on a different day, the All Blacks probably should have won that final, even being one man down, because Aaron Smith scores a try that is disallowed. Then a couple of minutes later, Beauden Barrett scores in the corner for the All Blacks, and now the score is suddenly 12-11. Richie Mwanga has a conversion to put the All Blacks in front. He ends up missing the conversion. A couple of minutes later, the All Blacks get a penalty just in the Springboks half, a little probably on the 5, in between the 5 and 15 meter, and Geordie Barrett steps up to try and take this penalty and win the All Blacks the game. He ends up missing the penalty, and the Springboks end up winning the Rugby World Cup final by 12 points to 11, while the All Blacks were one man down for the majority of that game. So I think on another day, the All Blacks probably should have won that game. If you run that game back 95 out of 100 times, the All Blacks win that game. It just wasn't meant to be for them on that day, on that specific day, in that final against the Springboks. But I think watching this episode from the All Blacks, kind of like they're chasing the sun for the Springboks, it shows a different side of the All Blacks. And I kind of found myself liking the All Blacks for a change, instead of them feeling like rivals, and that they're human, and that I think they feel like they probably should have won that game, and that it was a little bit stolen away from them, even though they were one man down. So as a Springbok fan, it was very interesting to watch and get an inside look into that All Black camp, and I think more rugby teams should be doing that. A very good first episode. I'm going to be watching all of the other episodes on YouTube. If you want to watch it, just go to the All Blacks channel, go watch episode 1. I think they're dropping episode 2 today, and then it'll continue throughout the month. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about this episode once you've watched it. It was very interesting to see it from a different perspective. If you haven't, make sure you absolutely murder that subscribe button, leave this video a like, and drop your opinions down in the comments. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take it easy. Peace.